Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. This episode was made possible by a sponsorship from Syneos Health. For more information, visit syneoshealth.com. In this episode, Taryn Grom, co-founder and editor-in-chief at PharmaVoice, meets with Barbara Krebs-Pohl, Ph.D., SVP, Head of Global BD&L and Alliance Management, Morphosis.
Barbara, welcome to the WOW podcast program.
Thanks very much. I'm pleased, and thanks for having me today.
It's our pleasure. I'm excited to dig into your journey. Can you tell us a little about your current role and your career journey, which led to your current position?
Yeah, thanks much. So, growing up as a daughter of a veterinarian, I was always interested in science. So I studied chemistry with majors in biochemistry and immunology. And I did both my master's studies and Ph.D. studies at university hospitals. So, I made the connection to medical applications of my research. But it was really a scholarship to go to then become Nobel Prize winner Sir Greg Winter's laboratory at the MRC LMB in Cambridge in the UK that fascinated me really in human antibodies. To be there at the forefront of human antibody technologies was such an inspiring privilege. And that was then finally the experience that brought me to Morphosis. At that time, a still small German biotech company, but developing world-class human antibody technology. At Morphosis in the first few years, I took over various positions in R&D. And then, finally, I went over to the dark side, so from the white lab coat side to the business, and I became responsible for sourcing new customers and negotiation collaborations. So since then, I have built a team, and together we have negotiated dozens of partnerships with academia, big pharma, and biotech for Morphosis. Partnerships that have led to, for example, to a blockbuster therapy like Tremfya, marketed by Janssen J&J, or a late-stage therapeutic antibody candidate developed by Roche for Alzheimer's. And last not least, that brought me to my role today, the recent acquisition of Constellation Pharmaceuticals, where I'm now the Chief Integration Officer and site head.
That's very exciting, and I love that it all stems from your family roots and how that love of science has inspired you to such a great position you're in now. Tell me a little bit more about Morphosis. What is the mission of the company? What specifically does your role entail? And as a follow-up to that, how has the organization transformed since you've been a part of it?
Yeah, so Morphosis is one of Germany's best-known public biotechnology companies that discovers, develops, and markets best-in-class and first-in-class cancer therapy. Today, Morphosis is already an integrated biopharmaceutical company with our first product on the market that we developed ourselves and are co-commercializing in the US with Incyte, Monjuvi, our breakthrough therapy for a certain type of lymphoma. And our vision is to become a real hematology oncology powerhouse, focused on proprietary drug development and multiple commercial products. So my role has been in the last decade and continues to be heading global business development licensing activities to ensure we have a robust pipeline and value-generating partnerships. Since I joined the organization, we have already transformed from initially being a service provider, that's where Tremfya, for example, stems from, to a drug developer, and then most recently to a commercial company.
It's exciting. And tell me a little bit about your transformation too, from the lab coat to the business development side, since you've been so successful on each side of the table, if you will, on both sides of the bench. Which do you prefer, the science part or the business part?
Yeah, good question, because I probably belong to some of the few people who have switched to the dark side, who also loved the bench side. So I was enthusiastic doing research in the bench, and it was more just by luck and by chance that I transitioned into another role. What I really like about this role is that it has this perfect combination and the fusion of science and business. Because in order to find the best partner for one of our compounds, you also still need to understand the science and be able to explain the science and to see the potential in the compound so that you can then negotiate the best deal for it.
Excellent. And you mentioned becoming one of the leading hematology and oncology companies. How does the acquisition of Constellation Pharmaceuticals fit into this vision?
So they have this best and first-in-class potential in myelofibrosis, which is a certain form of a blood cell-derived cancer, and also mid-stage asset with a broad potential in liquid and solid tumor indications. So therefore, it's really a perfect match for our vision.
Excellent. And when you were looking at acquisitions, what was the role you played in the acquisition of Constellation? Obviously, you were interested in its pipeline.
Yeah, I was responsible from start to the end. So for the search and evaluation process that led to the sourcing of Constellation being an opportunity, we wanted to look at more deeply the goal was to strengthen our pipeline, as well as for coordinating the due diligence. And then, of course, most importantly, for the negotiation, which also included the financing alliance we striked in parallel with Royalty Pharma. And then upon closing of the transaction, I became the site head and now integrating this subsidiary of Morphosis.
Wow, Barbara, that's a lot. Had you ever done that before, like going from start to finish with an acquisition?
Let me think about it. So what I had done before was from start to finish for a process that could have ended up in an acquisition, but actually ended up in a in-licensing. So, when you start a process like this, you never know in the beginning what deal you actually strike, because it also depends on the company having that asset. So I have done that before with Monjuvi 10 years ago, but that, as I said, was an in-licensing, not an acquisition.
Right, that's a lot of learned skill sets to get to that point. So kudos to you. When you talk about your focus on the hematology and oncology space, what are some of the trends that you are tracking currently, and what should we be watching for in the next year to 18 months in terms of whether it's further consolidation within the space, breakthrough science, technology? What should we be keeping our eye on?
Yeah, I think specifically in oncology, we will probably continue to see combination treatments. So I think that will be a trend that will continue. I do believe, though, that payers and also the doctors will at some point tend towards setting a limit to not combine an unreasonable number of treatments, combinations of, I don't know, 5, 6, or 7 compounds just in one treatment cycle. So therefore, it will be important to combine the safest and most efficient medicines. So with regard to Morphosis, I'm convinced personally that with the long-term data and the safety and efficacy profile we see with Monjuvi tafasitamab, that it will become an important backbone for all kinds of combinations. Another trend where I think our clinical and regulatory team is also some kind of trendsetter is the importance of real-world data, which is a benefit to the patient because it allows a comparison with less effective treatments historically without having a control group of patients directly in the same trial being treated in a control arm with a clearly less effective treatment. So these are just two of the trends I believe would be worthwhile watching in oncology.
I think you're right on, spot on, combination treatments as well as that real world data, and we're seeing such an acceleration of RWD within the industry and how important it's becoming to outcomes to benefit patients. So excellent. Let's talk a little bit about your love of the science and what have been some of those defining moments in your career, and why oncology is a particular focus for drug development.
Yeah, a good question. And of course, for me, it has been a journey really too, not only for Morphosis, obviously. So, I mean, going back maybe to my university studies. Being a chemist, of course, there are lots of avenues and different industries you could pursue. But for me, the interest in medicine has always been a strong, influence for my choices. So there's many moments, of course, that brought me to where I am today, and maybe I can mention a couple. Stop me if that gets too lengthy. But my first stop maybe was after the studies in Cologne, was Aachen. So I was working at a university hospital there, not in cancer, but with highly infectious bacteria. And totally unrelated to my work, I caught a terrible mid-ear infection one day. So I did what everybody did, also people who are not a researcher. I went to the doctor, I got some antibiotics, I went back to work. I was a diligent student working on my master's thesis, so I went back to the university hospital in the lab. But the symptoms became worse and worse, despite taking the antibiotics and painkillers. So I asked my coworkers just in the lab, across the floor in the microbiology department in the hospital to help me identify the strain that had infected me. And then actually we found out it was resistant against the antibiotics I got prescribed. So soon after I then got the right one, the infection was cured. And what a convincing experience for young scientists that medical science can be so important in treating diseases.
Wow. Talk about being your own doctor. That's a great story.
Yeah, so that was really amazing, that experience, how easy it in the end was, right? So and then if I think about another maybe defining moment, then already at Morphosis. So in the early days we were collaborating with Senecor, Janssen, J&J. We spent a lot of time in discussing in this cross-functional team, Morphosis and Senecor, what the winning features of the antibody should be. And we characterize and optimize quite a number of different candidates. So, which kind of subunit of the interleukin it was supposed to bind, with what kind of affinity, and then the activity in various assays, before we then, decided for the lead molecule. And then to see that candidate many years later as Tremfya being approved for a severe disease like psoriasis, it really makes all the hard and intense work of so many months and years worthwhile. So you understand that the science really, directly was connected to the outcome of a positive, medical treatment or event. How should I say? Well, then finally coming to oncology, I guess, to be able to provide patients with a better quality of life or prolonged life, right? To provide them with more moments with their loved ones. I mean, amongst all terrible diseases, right? But this is certainly a very important one, and that's really very rewarding. I guess on the other hand, you can also say it's one of the key challenges, right? Because it all goes back to science. Not all the hypotheses work, right? So the solution, I guess, is what I've learned over the years is it's as important, as pursuing successful programs is to stop the ones that are not successful and stop them early and focus on another program instead.
Absolutely. And how do you communicate that to your teams? Because just as you said, they've dedicated a lot of time and energy and effort and passion into these programs. And when they don't pan out, that's got to be very disappointing. How do you keep your teams buoyed during these low moments?
Yeah, that's an important point, and it's never an easy one. And we have tried several things, and one is certainly to also celebrate stop programs, right? So I remember once bringing in, I don't know, like 30, 40 pieces of cake from a really nice patisserie in Munich, to the office to celebrate with the team that we had stopped the program. We were evaluating something we wanted to in-license. And we have found out that it was too risky. And we celebrated with the team that we have been able, after investing all this time and effort, that we have still been able to say, no, it's not the right program, it's not the right moment, let's better not do it.
I love that. So in addition to bringing in lovely pieces of pastry to keep your teams uplifted, What are some of the other keys to your success in building high-performing teams? Because this is obviously a team sport, drug development. There's no way around it. It takes lots of hands. So what do you look for in those individuals when you're putting together a team?
Yeah, absolutely, Taryn. You can only do it with teams, and all the things I report today, right, of the successes of Morphosis or my successes, they have always been dependent on teamwork, right? And I think one key I always try to adhere to is when I think about putting together a team, is pick people and put them where they can be great, right? So that you put everybody at the right spot and put a diverse team together. They may have kind of different skill set, but the task the person then is contributing should be somewhere that person is excellent and loves to do it and can shine and be great. I think the other of the principles, which also goes in the direction of diverse teams a little bit, is I think you need to create an atmosphere where you can brainstorm and discuss. So I really, and even in the smallest team, with my group, I like everybody to put their best foot forward, even if then maybe I make the decision and then we go into execution mode. But I think it's important for leaders to not, go into a meeting with all the answers immediately and rather ask for proposals, because the proposals from the combination of the experts are so often better than what you had thought yourself of, right? And it's a skill of the leader to get these best proposals out of a team.
I love that. So tell me, what is some of the best leadership advice you have ever received? And what is some of the leadership advice you provide to your team as well?
Yeah, I think one of them I've already mentioned, kind of, put them where they can be great, or I would put it in other words. And that was actually is exactly kind of a line I got from one of the coaches, who worked with me in the early days, like, catch them when they are doing right. Because I think it's human that you would tell people things you would rather want them to improve. And maybe in the European culture, it's even more so than in the American culture, so that you point out the things that did not go so well. But actually, every leader should try to adhere to this. You also need to catch them when they are doing right. Let them shine when they do well. And make sure also you give transparency to management, right? That they can be seen and help them to grow and to develop, because it's also due to oneself being a good leader that you have good team members who are shining, right? And don't keep it all to yourself.
Very good. Clearly, you are a role model for other women in the industry. What does this responsibility mean to you?
Yeah, interesting question. So I guess for me, it means that I'm just aware of everything I do, whether it's as a scientist, as a businesswoman, or as a leader, that I always need to be aware and reflect what it means, for the next generation of leaders. So in other words, I cannot let them down by not performing well or being moody or, not being my best, right? I always try to be at my best.
Excellent. And you mentioned a coach earlier, but did you also have mentors during your career or somebody who sponsored you during your career journey?
Yeah, and interestingly, I never had like a real mentor program. But I would say in reality, I always had mentors and several. It came more natural, I would say. So, once in a while I had like leadership trainings, or I had a coach for a difficult situation. And I would say very often I just found my own mentors in my direct superiors, or maybe a peer to my boss, right? And they appreciated my work, they suggested me for new roles, and they were my sounding board. But even, colleagues or even team members, I like to discuss and seek their feedback before I decide. But like I would say a formal mentorship program, I actually never had, but I would propose and recommend it actually for, for young leaders starting their career. It's very helpful if you have a sounding board where you feel safe and can just try out some ideas before you go for the decision and execute them.
Wonderful. You've obviously been very successful in your career. What advice can you share with other women who also would like to reach the C-suite or executive level?
Yeah, and that's actually also, one of these questions I also ask, other women whom I meet. What has been their, recipe for making it work? So I can say for me, it's very clearly one theme that has always guided me, like love what you do or do what you love. Because if you do that, you will be great. So if I look back, for me, I didn't plan everything, right? When I started chemistry, I didn't plan, at some point in the future, I would be head of BD&L. I think what had worked for everybody was to be open-minded for opportunities when they come along, right? And I guess the other one is always try to be yourself. I don't think women leaders, we have to try to, to behave like men. We don't have to dress like men. We don't have to be all in gray suits, right? Be yourself and be confident, and maybe also use, the strengths of women where we can be really good, like be diplomatic, right? Communicate, take care. One thing maybe we can adopt more from men is build more networks. I think networking is something that women do very, very well in the family context, like taking care of your children and have people, who help if you are sick and things like that. I think we need to learn more from doing also more network in the business life.
Barbara, I agree with you 100,000%. I do think that's something that women don't do as successfully as men do. And it's so invaluable because you never know where your next opportunity is. You don't know who else you might be able to bring onto your team. And just from personal growth and learning and experience, it's a wonderful thing to have. Somebody once said, it's really important too to build your network before you need your network, right? And nurture them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's just something where we can make our life easier, in learning from others. And as I said, just have this discussion, right? Often while you discuss something with a peer, it gets more clear in your own mind.
Absolutely. You were so kind to share some of the highlights of your scientific days, but now I'm going to press you to identify an accomplishment or a wow moment that either shaped your career or changed the trajectory of your career.
Oh, yes. Let me think. Well, I would probably say that the in-licensing of Monjovi and tafasitamab like 10 years ago was clearly such a moment, right? I would say before that, I had then lots of out-licensing partnerships, revenue-generating deals, but basically then to spend money rather than generating revenue for the money, maybe put even a stronger responsibility on me feeling the burden of that, maybe even stronger than before. So 10 years ago, let me explain that. So similar to the process that led to the acquisition of Constellation recently, I already then led a team that searched and evaluated multiple programs. And also the negotiation as often was competitive, and we needed to find a win-win, for both the US biotech Xencor, where we in-licensed it from, and my own company, our own company, who was still like a smaller biotech, and we had only a limited amount of money to spend. So after very intense days and nights, and let me mention that, Xencor was in California and we were in Munich, right? We had a huge time difference and the negotiation was very intense. So we generated saying after these negotiations as a team, like, negotiate until the birds start to sing. Because when we were done in Munich, the birds started to sing, and Zenko could even hear it through the microphone. So after these many, hours we put in, we finally signed a deal. Zencor performed the first trial, and then Morphosis took over and continued to develop it. But what I will really never forget is, like, I can't recall exactly how long later, maybe a year later or so, a couple of years later, I will never forget when then one of the principal investigators on the trial called our CEO and said, we have a drug. Because he could, he had seen for the first time a response in one of these late stage cancer patients. So that was, this moment where I realized that, all this heavy lifting and the teamwork, we did the right choice in in-licensing Monjovi. And that, I think, what drives me still every day, do my share of helping bringing new medicines to patients in need.
That's exciting. That had to be one of those goosebump moments. We have a drug. And I love that we negotiated until the birds sing. That is great. I was going to say, because that had to make some very interesting time zone decisions too. Up all night, they're up in the morning. Wow. That's exciting. Well, congratulations to you. That is a wow moment. And now the drug is helping patients. That's got to be just such a gratifying feeling.
Yeah, thanks much, Taryn. And that really is, right? And also the other medicines that, we generated for our collaboration in the pharmaceutical or biotechnology industry. In the end, they all help patients in needs. But certainly, I would say oncology is a one that we have specialized on, and which also feels like is one of the most pressing areas where still, there's still a lot of need really to find better drugs or to improve existing drugs. And maybe, we can cure more cancers in the future. That's certainly the ambition.
Wouldn't that be exciting? 20 years ago when we talked about cancer, nobody would even think about talking about cancer with a cure. And now we're talking about cancer with potential cures. The only thing that was possibly a cure was surgical removal. But now we're talking about a therapeutic option that could really make a difference to hundreds of millions of people around the world. So thank you for doing all of the great work you're doing on behalf of those patients. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I've been fascinated, and I want to wish you continued great success in your pursuit of more cures. And I hope you get to hear the birds sing even more often.
Thank you so much, Taryn. And I, first of all, wanted to thank you again to give me this opportunity. And also all my coworkers and, Morphosis, and also all the patients and doctors that help us every day in developing and evaluating these new, medicine candidates.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. It's been a delight.
Same for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. And thanks again to Syneos Health for sponsoring this episode. For more information, visit syneoshealth.com. And don't forget to check out our other WOW podcast episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2021 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.